Welcome to Connecting Around Climate, an introduction to taking action for museum professionals. Brought to you by the Western Museums Association and the California Association of Museums. My name is Jason B. Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Museums Association. My pronouns are in the he series. My visual description is that I'm a pale-skinned man with short red hair and a close-cropped red beard. I'm wearing an orange shirt and sitting in a room with yellow walls that have artwork hanging on them. In this era of virtual meetings, when digital spaces may substitute our physical sense of place, it's important to reflect on the land we each occupy and to honor the indigenous people who have called it home. I'm speaking to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, within the boundaries of the Muskogee Creek Nation. Wherever we are each located, let us acknowledge all indigenous nations as living communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. We, the Western Museums Association and the California Association of Museums, recognize that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society which perpetuated the exclusion and erasures of many indigenous peoples throughout North America and beyond. We ask you to reflect on the place where you reside and work, and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form the richness of our world and profession. Thank you. And now for a few housekeeping notes before we introduce today's presenters. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted afterwards by our various organizations. Captioning for today's program can be accessed via the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. The chat will be open throughout the webinar, and you are encouraged to interact with your fellow attendees. And you can use the Q&A function to send questions to the panelists. During today's program, we will address as many of your questions as time allows. However, sometimes we are unable to answer all of them, and frequently questions can arise after reflecting on the program. So you are encouraged to reach out. Contact information will be provided at the end of the program. Lastly, follow us on social media to be aware of future programs. Links will be posted in the chat. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. First, Sarah Sutton is the co-founder and CEO of Environment and Culture Partners. She is an international museum leader and award-winning climate advocate. For over 20 years, Sarah has spearheaded global climate action through her cross-sector work empowering cultural institutions to fund, implement, and add their voices to climate action. Sarah holds a LEED AP certification from the U.S. Green Building Council, has served as a Salzburg Fellow in 2017, and earned the American Alliance of Museums Environment and Climate Professional Network's Individual Impact Award. Sarah lives in Tacoma, Washington. Stephanie Shapiro is the co-founder and managing director of Environment and Culture Partners. She is a strategic advisor and collaborator with specific expertise in the climate and cultural sectors. With a 13-year track record of delivering complex and high-impact projects, Stephanie specializes in building strong relationships to gain traction for lasting change. She works at a systems level to strengthen and accelerate environmental leadership of the cultural sector. Stephanie lives in Washington, D.C. Danielle Sakowski is the program manager for Environment and Cultural Partners. She is dedicated to culture and community She's a dedicated culture and community professional, bringing both academic expertise through her Master's of Arts in Museology and 5 years of field experience from 5 museums. She works across the Environment and Culture Partners functions and portfolios to support cultural organizations building their climate practice. Danielle lives in Seattle, Washington. Please give them a hearty welcome, and let's begin. Presenters, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you for the warm introduction. My name is Stephanie Shapiro, and thank you to the California Association of Museums and Western Museums Association for hosting this webinar with us. So we will begin with introductions and a few poll questions, and we'll introduce our team. Then we'll talk about what you need to know first about beginning to pursue climate action in the cultural sector, and then provide some takeaways so you can get started. And then we'll conclude with a discussion and some Q&As. Our team will be trying to answer the Q&As that you provide as well during the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer them all. So I'll begin with introductions. So again, my name is Stephanie, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a woman with short brown hair and blue eyes, and I'm wearing a blue sweater. My Zoom background is green with birds and the ECP logo. Sarah?
I'm Sarah Sutton. I'm a woman with short gray hair. I don't have my glasses on today, so you can see my eyes are blue. I have a blue-green sweater on. I'm sitting in a room in a cooperative workspace. The Zoom background shows Mount Tahoma behind me. The land that I'm on is the land of the Puyallup people. Danielle?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Sakowski. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a woman with long brown hair, hazel eyes, and a cream-colored sweater. I have the same background as Sarah. It's a picture of Mount Tahoma or Mount Rainier in the background. Nice to be here.
Great, thank you. And so now we'd like to hear about who is here. So in the chat, if you can please tell us if you work or volunteer at a cultural organization and the type of organization, and also maybe where it is located. We'll start with that for a few seconds. And then once answers get going, Tiana, if you could please share the poll questions. Wonderful. This is exciting. We had a quick pause and now they're all coming in. Wonderful. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Great. And we have two poll questions. The first is if you can please choose as many personal, sustainable, or climate action practices you might aspire to. The second question is to choose as many professional, sustainable, or climate action practices you might aspire to. And these include composting, reducing waste, reducing energy consumption, taking public transport. There's an option to say something else not on this list. Feel free to share in the chat what that something else not on the list might be. All right, and I'm not able to see the results, but we will share them probably at the end. So thank you. We will move on for now. All right, so thank you again for coming today. Our presentation, I'm sorry, here we've got the poll results. This is really exciting. We've got the first one for personal, sustainable choices, reducing waste. We've got everyone is on their way. This is really fantastic. Clean energy, public transport, and composting. You're also doing things not on the list, and you're doing these personally and at work. This is great, and hopefully what you'll learn in this presentation will help you continue. So again, we're excited to be able to provide you some places to start, maybe some information about projects or initiatives that are happening at other organizations and across the sector that you could participate in, so that you can be empowered to take more climate action professionally and personally. First, I'll share a short background about our nonprofit organization, Environment and Culture Partners, which we call ECP. ECP works at the sector level to empower museums, zoos, gardens, aquariums, historic sites, you name it, in knowledge and skills needed to influence change, the partnerships needed to do the work, and the diverse voices to advocate for culture in every climate conversation. Since we were founded in 2021, we've collaborated on 8 major projects and engaged with over 500 cultural institutions and associations. We've built our foundation on 3 key pillars, which are shown at the right: capacity building, engagement, and representation. We're committed to building the cultural sector's capacity to engage communities in climate learning and to make informed climate smart decisions, conduct research, work on sector-wide scalable engagement projects where we embed our sector partners to do the real work of addressing the climate crisis, and we advocate for the cultural sector's voice to be heard in environmental discussions at every level: community, regional, federal, and global. So why do this work? And you're all here probably because you're interested, and we perhaps don't need to convince you, but we know sometimes there are those that do need to be convinced. Well, it's real and it's happening now, and we're all living with it, and we have been living with it. We're motivated by the power of the collective cultural sector to be both accountable for our contributions to the climate crisis and also responsible as mission-driven, charitable, public-facing organizations to work with communities and other organizations to create a verdant, equitable, and just world. And because we have the data supporting museums pursuing this work. The next 2 slides are bar charts displaying data results from a 2022 study done between the American Alliance of Museums and Wilkening Consulting. The blue bars represent museum goers, and the red bars represent US adults as the broader population. Overall, 92% of museum goers and 88% of US adults think climate change is a topic museums should cover across the listed museum types, which are art, children's, history, and natural history museums, botanical gardens and arboretums, historic sites, science centers or planetariums, and zoos and aquariums. The second bar chart is organized and displayed the same way. Overall, 91% of frequent museum goers and 86% of US adults think museums should be working to reduce their carbon footprint across the same types of museums. I'm now going to pass it over to Sarah to talk about what you need to know first.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we'd like to orient you to thinking about how to do this work. It's important that when we're done today, you know that good climate work is taking place, but it's happening unevenly in the sector. There's a lot more to do, and every single one of us has good work to do in this area. But to do this, well, Stephanie and Danielle and I worry at night that climate change will come to you and your organization before you're ready. So although we do lots of work with groups and great big groups of people doing this work together, we also are invested in helping individuals feel like they can create change. And that's the focus of our talk today. So let's look at these guiding principles about how you can take action. Keep in mind that everyone starts somewhere. Doesn't matter where, just get started. That no one can know or do enough, but doing something is critical. That you can let go of the guilt of what you haven't done yet or not able to do, because it just interferes with making progress where you can. And that progress and that action is different for everyone. But if you really need coaching on where to start, the first thing is to reduce your energy use and the carbon emissions. And second is tell others what you're doing, because that's what gives other people the courage to do this work. So we have a few terms I'd like to share with you, just to make sure everyone's using the same language and making the same decisions using the same information. Just 2 slides of these words. The first one, environment, that's the ecosystem you live in, the water, the air, the trees, the animals, the plants. Weather is what's going on outside your window today. Climate is what goes on outside your window decades over time. It's the patterns that are developed. Climate change is the change in the global system that comes from the warming of water, air, and land all together, which disrupts the patterns in the climate. And that disruption comes from primarily greenhouse gas emissions from burning coal, gas, oil, or wood, mostly carbon dioxide and methane. There are a few others, but those are the biggies. Now, this slide of terms talks about those actions that we have the most influence over. Life cycle assessment is a tool, a research tool for understanding what the impacts are from the energy and the materials we use when we take care of our home, take care of collections, when we drive our car. You can look at what all of those impacts are and make comparison between one choice and another. And we use that in order to mitigate our impacts on the climate. That is, reduce how much we ourselves or our institutions drive climate change. Adaptation, equally important as mitigation, is getting ready to deal with climate change. And resilience is dealing with climate changes so well that we actually come out the other side better, stronger, and healthier in our communities. But that only happens if we include climate justice in that work. And that's acknowledging the truth that those with the least power, who have made the least contributions to these global changes, are the ones who are most often the most affected. And all of these things, justice, resilience, adaptation, assessment, all of that is climate action. And when you do those things, you are doing good climate work. So we're going to think about how you create change. It's nothing that happens linear. It's nothing that happens with a checklist. It happens through systems thinking. It's learning how to think in multiple dimensions. And when you do use system thinking, you use all of these activities. You look at the parts and the processes that are inside a system and how they work together. You try to understand the things and the things they do and what capacities they have. You try and always look at them all together, because if you just slice out one little bit and you change it, then when it interacts with the rest of the system, it's still out of sync and you really haven't solved the problem that you're working with. You have to acknowledge something called mental models, and I'll talk about that a little in a moment. The mental model is what we have in our heads about what's going to happen or what it will be like for us. And sometimes those mental models are true and helpful, and sometimes they're not. So understanding them is really important each time you're trying to change your own behavior or others within the system. And when everyone's on the same page, working in the same direction, it's amazing how well the system works. But sometimes it takes a while to get everybody to that same spot. So care and attention to others in this system to help them help you change it is really important. So let's use that thought of systems thinking to look at a pretty simple system, changing LEDs in your museum. So let's say you want to take out incandescent or halogen fluorescent bulbs because you want to save energy. Well, the light bulb is a part in this, just the way the tracks are a part, just the way the cans for the lights are a part of this system, and the room is, and the art on the walls are. Those are all parts of this system. The way they interact together has a lot to do with heat from the bulb and the light that it emits. So understanding that is important. And we know that when they work together and we actually have those LEDs in there, you don't have to spend so much money on energy. You don't have to spend extra energy to cool down the room because there isn't extra heat. You don't have to pay to buy as many bulbs or put them all, the labor to put them in. Those are all parts of the parts and process of the system. The mental model comes in with when you think about who needs to be involved in the discussion if we're going to change the lighting in a gallery, and are they interested in this change happening, and what are their concerns and their information about doing this. And understanding their mental approach to this is really helpful in getting everyone on the same page so you can convince someone to write the check and start installing those LEDs. So that's what systems thinking would look like when you're tackling a problem at your museum. But whatever system you're trying to change, there are 5 things that have to happen. That's in the lower right-hand side of the screen. Create awareness, build knowledge, create attitudes, foster skills, enable participation. No matter what climate activity we take individually or together, we need to go through this process. Danielle, Stephanie, and I do this every time, whether we acknowledge it. We need to understand the situation and the system. know how we can influence it, and start thinking about how we're going to create change. So every time you try and do something, you'll be doing this work as well. And that's where agency comes in. Agency is so important because any action you take or your museum takes depends upon the feelings or perceptions of all three types of agency that you see listed on this screen: individual, collective, and proxy agency. Now, my mom thinks I'm the one at the top of the screen there that looks like a bandit doing everything on her own, but that's not true. Everything that ECP does includes collective action, cooperative work, or doing work on behalf of others. And the agency to choose which level we're working at comes from watching and doing and learning, figuring it out each time. It doesn't come from any spot of special courage in us or moral authority. It comes from aligning our values, our power, and our choices at different levels of agency. And then we use that agency to shift that system we were learning about. We figure out where we're going to influence, disturb, or disrupt that system. Here's an example of influence. It's like when the Kresge Foundation in the early 2000s was offering $20,000 for every cultural capital project they funded, so that the project could get LEED certification. They were trying to drive everyone towards green practice through LEED certification. So they were influencing the system. An example of disturbing the system would be something like the Institute for Museum and Library Services starting to require greenhouse gas emissions as part of your application process. We all just did an IMLS grant. What if that SPFF form had greenhouse gas emissions on it? Then everyone would have to make sure they understood how to measure their greenhouse gas emissions. That would definitely disturb the system. Really disrupting the system would be if every single federal grant asked us to do this work. That's still a good version of disruption, though, maybe a little painful, but it does move everyone forward in a whole new direction to create change. So depending upon your situation and your goal, you'll influence, disrupt, or disturb. Now, this next slide has lots of examples of agency. I am not going to go through that. It will be part of the material you can access afterwards, but it tells you about how you can take individual, collective, or proxy agency at any scale of work in your museum, no matter what your role. Now, I have just 3 more slides to share with you. I'd like to introduce you to the trajectory of change across the cultural sector, types of museums, and within museums, just so that you have context for how much change there's going on and what might have, how it's evolved, what has caused it. And then Danielle and Stephanie will give you some good examples of good action where you might be able to participate. So this timeline shows you that starting in early 2000s, we had a really big building boom going on in the cultural sector. So we built new museums or we renovated them. And they used LEED, Kresge was a big part of that, in order to focus their work. But when the crash came in 2008, we ran out of money for doing that. And we stopped building. We ran out of money for paying people to do their work as well. So we started looking for how we could save that money, and we did it by looking for energy efficiency. And at about that same time, between 2009 and 2016, when we're doing lots of energy efficiency work, the museums are not neutral. Whoops, can you see that? Museums are not neutral. Hashtag got going, and museums started to thinking about how they could talk about climate change. All of this was getting going, and then in 2017, the president threatened to step out of the Paris Agreement. And it caused a big flurry across all the sectors. Those of us who were doing this climate work felt that we would still do the work. We all got together in a big coalition called We Are Still In, and the cultural institutions were part of that, because we felt it was important that whether or not the government was doing this work, civil society would. And by the time the presidency changed hands and we were back in the Paris Agreement, we'd reached a new equilibrium where the government was doing good climate work and all of the sectors that had stepped up before were going to still do that climate work. We are at the best moment right now to take great climate action because both groups are working together. Now, in the museum sector itself, where did the change happen? Not just overall, but in the types of museums. It really started early with the children's museums. Then it moved to places like the Wagner Free Institute, which is in the upper right-hand corner, and the Science Museum of Minnesota in the lower left, science museum organizations that were taking it on after the children's museums got it going. And then the history and the arts organizations were a little slow to come along because they felt it was a little off mission. But as Stephanie said, we are charitable, climate-oriented, charitable, community-focused educational institutions. Everyone can participate, and so they are. And that means that in our individual institutions, we're likely to start with changing those LEDs, but we quickly progress to measuring our carbon impacts and starting to be more resilient for ourselves and our communities looking at climate change. Now I'll hand it over to Danielle to talk about some more examples. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So these are the kinds of climate actions that professionals and organizations are taking now. And we're going to talk through these so that you can start to get ideas about what this might look like in your own professional work. Although it sounds like some of you from that poll earlier may already be doing some of these, which is great. So I'm going to talk about energy, landscapes, and materials, and then Stephanie is going to pick it up with people and programs. And I just want to say too that, these areas are all going to flow into each other. And I want you to consider that systems thinking that Sarah was talking about before, and that this is really just a structure we're using to organize this information for this presentation. So energy in buildings accounts for around 40% of global carbon emissions. And this is important, especially when we consider that pre-pandemic, it was estimated that there were over 33,000 institutions in the US. And the Culture Over Carbon research study created the cultural sector's first in-depth energy use analysis and the first estimate of the cultural sector's energy impacts on climate. And what it showed us for the very first time was the unique energy use and energy needs at cultural organizations. So for example, the graph on this slide shows what the energy use intensity looks like at all the different types of museums and organizations that were included in this study. And we learned that art museums and zoos and aquariums had the highest EOI in this particular instance. And aside from many other important learnings, paramount was the finding that there is a great collective opportunity for the cultural sector, museums, and all these different types of organizations to make a climate impact by reducing energy consumption. And related to this is the Carbon Inventory Project, which was the follow-on project to Culture Over Carbon. And it helps staff members at cultural organizations learn how to monitor and understand their energy consumption and the associated carbon emissions using EPA's free tool, Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And then they contributed their totals to create the first estimate of the US cultural sector's carbon footprint. I'm not going to read everything that's on this slide, but please do check that out. And the reason I'm telling you about all this is because data from projects like these can help you with a roadmap of next actions. And it can be used to make the case to focus on energy, perhaps to your executive director, your board, a funder, or maybe even your community. So you can start in the energy realm by tracking energy consumption, or you can also get started with an energy audit like the Anchorage Museum in Alaska. So they performed an ASHRAE Level 2 commercial energy audit, and ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And this is typically a lower cost and easy entry step to figuring out what you can do in your organization to be more energy efficient. And the findings from this particular audit showed that they may be able to produce their own energy and reduce their energy costs. So Sarah talked about this a little earlier, but another good starting point for reducing energy emissions can simply be to use LED lights. So the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle replaced all their lighting with LEDs. And in addition to reducing carbon emissions, this has the potential also to reduce energy bills. And we museums are always looking for ways to conserve funds, and this is an excellent way to do that. And better yet, each of these actions at these museums were funded by the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative program, so they didn't have to pay for this. And And we don't have much time to talk about that program right now. We're happy to answer questions later, but I just want you to know that there's funders out there that want to support this work. So now talk a little about the ways that museums and similar organizations use their landscapes as ways to support the work they do and message and model environmental and climate actions for their public. So, for example, you may have heard of pollinator gardens. Local to ECP is the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium in Tacoma, Washington. And they use a pollinator garden, which provides food and homes to bees and other insects and creatures that all support a thriving ecosystem. And another benefit of a pollinator garden is that they may be even lower maintenance than other types of landscaping. And with this, the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium is showing visitors that people have an opportunity to do this at their homes or perhaps in a community garden. And of course, these kinds of gardens don't have to be at zoos. They show up at museums too. And this example just happens to be at a zoo. So another consideration when thinking about sustainable landscapes is water. So Sunnyland Center and Gardens is located in a desert environment, and it's important that they're finding opportunities to conserve water. So they do this by reducing their lawn area, using native plants, and they also use practices like water retention basins and ground covers that allow for on-site water percolation, which if you don't know what that is, it's the process of slowing the flow of water so that it can get down to the soil, and it's really good for soil retention and soil health. So the Detroit Zoo focused on landscapes as a way to engage their public for the good of their community, but also the local environment. So over 2 years, zoo staff and volunteers planted nearly 2,000 trees at the zoo. And then also through a partnership with the city, they also planted trees throughout the city of Royal Oak where they're located. And this work was to add joy and beauty, but also improve air quality and add more of a canopy to provide shade and cool things down, especially considering the number of extreme heat events, which are increasing globally. So another important focus in climate action are the materials that we use. And that can be translated into many things, even of course, the materials that we use to construct a museum building. And I'd just like you to consider the materials that you may have control over in your own work as we go through this little section. So there's tools available to help consider this. So on this slide here, this is the Sustainability Tool in Cultural Heritage, STITCH. It's from the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation. And it's a free resource, especially for professionals in collections care and exhibits and conservation to help make sustainable choices around the materials that they might use. So it has a life cycle assessment library of case studies and also a carbon calculator for materials. So in the screenshot here, you can see what the carbon emissions are of 1 cubic meter of plywood versus using a similar size of hardwood maple. So perhaps if you're using those to build an exhibit. And organizations all over the place are taking climate action by looking at the ways to reduce carbon impacts of things, especially waste from throwing things away. So Kids Quest Children's Museum encourages reusing materials that might otherwise enter the landfill in their reuse and rebuild room. And tinker rooms like these are an important feature at children's museums and may frequently use recycled materials, which is a great thing. And Kids Quest is taking this one step further by considering the recycled materials that they use in these rooms, like plastic bottles that get donated to them, as items that should be reused in that room over and over again, versus visitors creating art projects out of that plastic bottle and covering it in glitter and glue, and then making it impossible for that recycled object to be recycled. And it's more likely that it then becomes trash, even though, of course, those art projects from our children are very precious. And this just helps their organization as well as their community consider the value of objects and to really think about waste. So another organization, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, they used the COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity to reduce waste. And they reduced single-use plastics by purchasing 30% of all cleaning supplies in bulk packaging. They also prioritized reusable personal protection equipment and prevented the waste of approximately 30,000 masks. And perhaps that work was guided by a policy by the aquarium, but it was individuals that made those choices to participate in this work. So the last example I'll share is the Madison Children's Museum. and they're addressing food waste as well as food access with the Little John's Lunchbox. It's a pay what you can cafe. They do this in partnership with the nonprofit Little John's, who provides the meals, which are made from ingredients donated by grocery stores and farms, ingredients that would have otherwise gone to waste because they're not pretty enough to be sold in stores. And we know that methane gases, especially from food waste, are a major contributor to the changes in our climate system. As is addressing inequities, as we introduced briefly earlier about climate justice, which you'll hear a little bit more about next. And taking care of people and working with communities is an important aspect of the climate work that museum professionals do, that perhaps you're doing and will continue to do. So I'll let Stephanie take it from here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Danielle. So as we know, people and programs are really at the heart of our public-facing organizations. And I'm just going to share a few examples of great work that's going on around the sector, and then conclude with some takeaway action items for you that you can take with you. So first, I'd like to share this project called Caretakers of Wonder. It's a 2-year project funded by IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which we are co-leading with the Madison Children's Museum and Association of Children's Museums. And this project involves 9 children's museums in 4 ecological regions across the US, working with a multidisciplinary team of experts in early childhood, climate psychology, culture, and climate. We are creating together a developmental framework and toolkit for children 0 to 8 to build agency, compassion, and climate knowledge for healthy children and a bright climate future. This content, including the framework and toolkit, will be available in fall of next year. For exhibitions, you could think about hosting your own climate exhibit or someone else's. This is an image of the Climate Museum's You Can Make a Difference on Climate exhibit at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden in Brooklyn, New York. There's also an exhibition, We Refuse to Die. Sorry, the program is We Refuse to Die, which is part of the exhibition Unsettling Matter, Gaining Ground at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. In September 2020, the Intentional Community and Retreat Center of Brighton Bush in Detroit, Oregon, was devastated by the convergence of 2 climate-fueled wildfires that ruined people's homes and animal habitats. In 2023, members of the art collective Not an Alternative, also known as the Natural History Museum, a traveling museum for the movement, joined members of the Brighton Bush community to salvage trees killed in the wildfires. Over the coming years, the trees will stand again, reborn as sculptures called externalities, hand-carved and installed in Gulf South and Appalachian yards, facing the petrochemical plants and fossil fuel facilities that cause them to burn. And this is an image of, you can see the carved externalities in here with one of the communities they worked with. Another idea is to host a public program related to climate, like the Science Museum of Virginia's A Hotter and Wetter Virginia, which focused on building resiliency to climate weather events. The Wild Center in Tupper Lake, New York on Lake Placid is an example of an institution that's a leader in doing climate work. And they're not only focusing on operations, exhibitions, and education, but also engaging community and with youth in their youth climate program. So they hold summits, which have gone international, and they have a toolkit and many resources on their website for how young people can address climate change, how to host these summits, and how to engage your own community, whether it's a retreat center, whatever other organizations might be part of it. The Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum launched a Center for Environmental Justice on Earth Day of this year, and this center is guided by the museum's mission and vision to work with local communities and amplify collective power for a more equitable future. The center is will discuss racial and discriminatory roots that shape our environments, moving away from traditional environmental movements, which typically focus on the natural world, and moving towards embracing a humanities-led community engagement practice to mobilize research, break down silos, and activate research outside of the institution's walls. Some of their programs include the Women's Environmental Leadership Initiative, which was founded in 2018, Urban Waterways, and Research and Educational Initiative, and much more. A project that we at ECP are leading and are developing content for is a cooperative agreement between the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Foundation for the Advancement and Conservation. This project began as a response to the gap identified of free, accessible resources for cultural organizations to use to begin their climate resilience development. Resources are being developed to help cultural heritage stewards increase their awareness of climate risks and events by using an interactive web-based map, a snapshot of which is shown at the left, and then develop the knowledge and skills needed to take steps to build a climate resilience strategy. A snapshot of the first 4 of these are shown on the right. And we have 2 learning groups, one in New Mexico and one in Puerto Rico, consisting of 5 cultural organizations that are piloting the resources and developing resilience strategies together. These resources will begin to become available in the next few weeks and will continue to be updated throughout April 2024. Another great resource is the Climate Toolkit, which is out of the Phipps Conservatory and Gardens in Pittsburgh. This website connects museums all around the world with each other to learn about each one's climate work, whether it's energy savings, education, public programming, or all of the above. As Danielle said, many of these items overlap with each other, so take that into account when you're thinking in your systems way. Here, participants are able to contact other participants to learn about their initiatives, learn about other topics if you tune into some of their webinars, and they've even established a listserv for museum facility professionals to connect. So we know that was a lot of information, and we do want to be able to leave you with some next steps and actions. Before we jump into our Q&A, I just want to share a few of the ones that you can take here. Again, as Danielle said, we will be sharing the slides and additional resources that have links in them after with all attendees, and they'll be also I think on a website as well. So we'll send out that information. So a quick rundown across our established categories of energy, landscape, materials, and people and programs. For energy, we recommend starting with Culture Over Carbon report and learning about Energy Star Portfolio Manager. On the strategy side, think about developing a sustainability or climate action plan and check out Discovery Museum of Acton's sustainability plan to start. For landscape, learn about your local pollinators, native plants, and your community's tree canopy, and see how your museum could contribute to that canopy or integrate more native plants into its landscape. For materials, use Stitch when you're thinking about materials for exhibitions, education, or anything else. You could also develop a preferred purchasing list for your organization that you could all share and work together and even order in bulk. And for some materials, think about, especially for furniture, think about going to your local Habitat for Humanity Restore, or there's other similar organizations as well. For people and programs, you could start with your visitors or even your staff taking the SASE survey, and then plan a climate conversation after that. Explore the Climate Toolkit and attend environment and climate conferences or similar sessions, which you're already doing by being here today. There are a lot of places to start, so we recommend choosing one. And as Sarah said, don't be guilty that you're not doing everything. Just start somewhere. And if you have a friend or a partner that you know at another organization or even within your own organization, work with them. So please feel free to reach out to our team. We love to hear about the work that you're doing and seeing if we can integrate it into our projects that we're working on. Please also visit our website. It looks like that information was shared in our chat to sign up for our newsletter. And we're happy to move into the Q&A section. Right now, we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but please feel free to send them in or ask questions in the chat as well. Thank you again for having us, and we look forward to connecting with you and having a great discussion over the next 15 minutes. We're also open to hearing any of the something else on the list that wasn't listed for some of the work you're doing professionally or personally. Please share that. We would love to hear what that is as well. I'm going to stop sharing, give everyone a little bit of a break. Great. So we have a question here about any advice on finding and engaging climate scientists on exhibit development. Yes, do it. Yes, I think we definitely have a few that we can suggest and connect you to. There's some really great work being done, especially out of universities. So one place to start we would recommend is in your community. Maybe you're co-located near a university that is doing some great work. So definitely partner with them. They also might have some additional research that they're doing that in the social sciences, especially, that they could contribute to your exhibitions or even education programs. Also, if anyone who's attending who's engaged with any climate scientists, please feel free how to do that. Off the top of my head, I know Arizona State has a really great program.
I'll add a bit to that and then take the next question. If you find another museum that's done a climate exhibit you like, ask them, who their science advisors were. Maybe they were in-house and they can share that with you, or maybe they partnered with someone in particular. We're starting to see that there are curators of climate change, just a few around the country, and I expect that to expand. I would love that to expand. But in the meantime, we have to grow our own by creating relationships with folks who are doing the climate research, who might need our translation skills for communicating with the general public. I think there was a good problem out of PacSci, Pacific Science Center, now that I think of it, where they were pairing scientists with museum educators to help the scientists be better at communicating about climate change. And that's a great service that a museum could provide. There was a question on best techniques for bringing along resistance administrators at any institution. Bringing along anyone who's resistant requires using a lot of the skills we already have as museum professionals, that we know how to identify where a person is in their learning cycle about an issue, meeting them there and moving them on. So rather than expecting them to meet us at our climate knowledge or our similar climate goals, finding out what's important to them, the things that are of value to them, gives you a way to identify your point of leverage. So if it's an administrator who's focused on the financial bottom line, you don't need to make any arguments about greenhouse gas emissions. Focus on the money. That's what matters to them, and come up with a money path that motivates them. They can learn the climate stuff later. I wish they'd learn it now. They can learn it later. I just want them to get moving. So find out what motivates them. If there's someone who's more concerned about being able to source things locally or support local farmers, then start at that conversation with them about how that's hopeful. Maybe you run a cafe and you're trying to figure out how to make it local, but make it affordable. You might start with one local meal a week as a way to build practice and trust in doing this work, rather than saying that it has to be all local or it has to be all affordable. So finding some sort of midway negotiating point, compromise to get started is fine. If we use all or nothing as the only way to take climate action, we're going to have a lot of people who are fighting us, who drag down our work. We prefer to work with the folks who are motivatable or already motivated, and the others will come along later or eventually if they have to. So work where you feel like you have the most power to create change, any level of that agency.
And it looks like in the chat, Corey Gooch, thank you. Let's see. Our museum did not receive a grant because they could not demonstrate enough commitment to reducing carbon emissions. I think that emphasizing that funders are more and more looking for that one way to make the case to higher ups that their institution should pay more attention, perhaps even in the budget. Yes, we're seeing that more and more. And I think being able to be transparent also about the work that you're doing. So that perhaps is not the first step for if you have anyone resistant that you're working with, but making the commitment by, you're right, not sometimes having just a volunteer-led green team could be the piece. But we also know that it's really hard sometimes to be hiring a totally new position that's for sustainability, or especially a sustainability officer for everything. Typically, they're just sitting in the facilities office. And we know that for organizations like ours, we want them to be having more of that umbrella holistic look. More organizations, though, are thinking about it, recruiting for it, and hiring. So that is definitely a place that's going forward. And I would say if you are able to be transparent about having a plan or integrating, you have a pillar of your strategic plan and you're writing down what your goals are, whether they're quantifiable or you're in the discovery stage, funders want to see that, and that makes a difference. And I know I just want to circle back quickly to the one thing that Danielle did mention, the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative for visual arts organizations. The initiative is having its upcoming round of funding for visual arts organizations pursuing energy efficiency and clean energy generation work. So please go to the Frankenthaler climateinitiative.org webpage to learn more, and the application should be posted in February, or should open, in February.
And I'm seeing two questions about infrastructure, energy infrastructure, glass kilns and furnaces, and ceramic studios and kilns and kilns. This kind of transition from what has traditionally been a gas-fired equipment to electric is happening now. It's challenging, and it's a big capital investment. So there are a couple of ways to look at it. At some point, that current gas-fired machine reaches end of life and has to be changed anyway. That is a perfect moment to turn it into an electric system instead of gas. The cost is not the full cost of this new electric facility, piece of equipment. It's just perhaps an added cost of the installation compared to replacing it like with like. Replacing things like with like is no longer acceptable. That's what got us into this problem. So both of those institutions thinking about shifting to electric equipment, we so appreciate it. That is good, strong, important work. And you need to use the psychology of you have to replace the equipment anyway. This is the time frame to do it, and we're going to go. I just listened to a webinar, and this goes to the funding question I saw as well. A webinar by Rocky Mountain Institute, World Resources Institute, and America is All In on something called the Afford tool. And that helps you look at the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act funding for this big transition. Some of that really has been for nonprofits. Some of it has a direct pay capacity, which I can tell you a little bit more in detail if you want, a direct pay capacity instead of a tax credit to help you fund renewable energy projects and clean energy projects. But don't forget to think about your city or your county or state's energy and emissions reductions goals. They are receiving funding to reduce their emissions. If they know that you can help them reduce their emissions, you can be folded into that grant. And if they get that funding, you're then funded to do your work. But as we know, they forget to think about us, whether they're planning anything, especially climate action. So find out what your climate goals are for your community and find out what type of applications they're going after so that you can be part of it with these projects.
And this adds on to that. And thanks for Corey. Thank you, Corey, as well for submitting it to the chat. But funders do want to see the walking the walk. And so being able to share with, if it's your mayor, check out if your mayor is part of the climate mayors organization or consortia. Look at in universities, a lot of universities, Second Nature for organizations are, Second Nature is an organization that is a consortia of higher ed institutions taking climate action. So check out that list as well. But funders do want to see the walking the walk. And to add on, NEH is National Endowment for the Humanities, has really been the leader on more of the cultural side. They have a grant, the Climate Smart, a grant that is coming, let's see, their next round, it should be opening in August, but that's for consortia of museums or individual museums that are developing climate action plans. I think there's a couple other grants that they have. The Sustaining Cultural Heritage has been around for years, which is inherently linked to climate as well. And we know IMLS, there's definitely some that are related to climate, including the Aquarium Conservation Partnership and Veritas Group. Were just awarded some funding for an IMLS group related to carbon emissions reductions as well. And great, we'll take one more. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
No, I agree. If we have one more question, that's great. If we don't, I would love to add one more thing on, but I'll just give it a second here. In case a question does come in, I'll stop talking, but I did want to just add on to our very first question about, people that might be leadership that might be hesitant about doing this kind of work. I wanted to find something from the Culture Over Carbon report. So if they're motivated by money, one of the things we learned from Culture Over Carbon was that if all the cultural organizations, that was about 133 orgs that participated in the study, decreased energy use by 20%, the energy saved would translate to about 24 million operational energy savings per year. So just something to think about if you're needing some data point to also help convince that change.
Well, with that, I really appreciate all this great knowledge. I'm going to make one more quick introduction, and that is to myself. I'm Jennifer Caballero. I'm from the California Association of Museums. I'm a woman with long gray hair and a green sweater. I just want to say thank you to Sarah Sutton, Stephanie Shapiro, and Danielle Sakowski of Environment and Culture Partners, and a special thanks to Jason B. Jones and his team at the Western Museums Association. It was wonderful to have such a stellar turnout today and the chance to learn and share some great practices going on across the continent. We have seen participants here and examples from Canada and Wisconsin and Santa Barbara and the deserts. So this has been really a truly impactful kind of moment and very inspirational. So I appreciate everybody's participation in this session. And we invite you as CAM and WMA to come and join us for our future in-person and online programming. This program today will be posted on our various websites, so you'll have a chance to go back and look at some of those slides. And we look forward to hearing from you about this session and about future convenings. So I'm going to wrap it up. It's just about 1 minute before the hour ends, and I'm going to thank everyone for their participation today on behalf of California Association of Museums, Western Museums Association, and Environment and Culture Partners.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.